Call the meeting to order. This is the March 27th meeting of the Newcastle Planning Commission. I'm the chair, Charlie Gadzik. Would you all join me in a flag salute? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Director Fitzgibbons, would you call the roll?
Commissioner Marsh.
Here.
Commissioner.
Here.
Commissioner Danzler is excused. Commissioner Lowe.
Here.
Commissioner Van Natta.
Here.
Vice Chair Kennard.
Present.
And Chair Gadzik.
Present. Okay, you all have the agenda in front of you. Are there any changes to be made to the agenda that you'd like to recommend? Okay, seeing none, we'll consider the agenda approved. Next is the approval of minutes. We'll take them in order. We have 3 meetings to approve. First is the minutes of our February 28th meeting, which you've had access to. Are there any corrections to the minutes of the February 28th meeting? Okay, seeing none, we'll consider those approved. Next is the meeting of March 9th. Any changes, corrections to that meeting's minutes? No? Okay, we'll consider those approved. And finally, the minutes of our March 13th meeting, which was the open house, not exactly a formal meeting. Any changes to that? No. Okay, all the minutes are approved. We will now open our public comment period. We have some people with us in the audience here at City Hall. Would anyone like to make a comment? Okay. No one in the audience wishes to make a comment? There's nobody online. Well, they don't have the ability to make a comment, I should say. Yeah. So we'll close the public comment period and move to commissioner comments. And I'll just let whichever commissioner would like to speak to raise their hand. And Commissioner Quigg.
I would like to invite everybody that can hear my voice Saturday at noon to come to Lake Bourne Park, where we'll have the chief, hopefully the mayor, and hundreds of families again for another giant egg hunt at Lake Bourne Park with my daughter dressed as a 6-foot-tall bunny rabbit and hundreds of eggs packaged by the local Girl Scout troop. And please, a little bit of community fun for the whole world, and also enjoying the centerpiece of Newcastle.
What time is that?
It's at noon on Saturday.
Apparently the egg doesn't fall very far from the chicken. Would any other commissioners like to make a comment? Yes, Vice Chair Kennard.
Last night was Newcastle Trails annual meeting, and it was well attended. We had a couple of us commissioners were there, several 3 city council members were there, and it was just a really good venue. What came about for me was the recognition by the president of Newcastle Trails, Gary, that the trail system in Newcastle is very close to being complete. I mean, there's not a lot of big trails left, and it's really to the credit of Newcastle Trails that happens. And so it's a very impressive organization and a great meeting last night.
Any other commissioners? No? Well, just to add on to your comment about the trails, not on Newcastle Trails, but the city has been active doing some trail work on a trail that I frequent frequently, which is the May Creek Park Trail, which had many stretches where there were routes that were pretty treacherous, and they've now cleared those all out and smoothed them. It's a really nice, easy walk now for those who take that trail. So thank you, City of Newcastle. That brings us to reports. The chair does not have a report. Community Development Director, would you like to make a report?
Everyone probably got the email, but just a reminder that our survey is now posted online. The results from the survey, it took a little while, but they are on there. So if people go to the comprehensive plan web page, which is newcastlelaw.gov/Newcastle2044, you can find the survey results. So anyway, that's the only thing I have.
There's no public hearing tonight, so we will move to general business, and it goes back to Director Gibbons with a briefing on the legislation and what it means for Newcastle.
Thank you, Chair Kadzik. And for those of you who will be in attendance at the April 2nd council meeting coming up, we will have a report from our lobbyist, and I will be following up with a very similar presentation, but her full report on the last legislation will include everything beyond housing as well. So today I'm just going to do hopefully a recap that answers some of the questions that have been coming out. I'm going to try to do this quickly because I know we have a lot of conversation to be had tonight. So feel free to stop me and ask me to clarify anything, or if you want to talk to me offline, I'm always available too. House Bill 1220, and why we're going to talk about House Bill 1220 really quickly. We talked about it in depth a year ago, just a reminder of why we're doing all this. House Bill 1054 came up in one of our previous meetings, and there were questions about what is this? Answering the questions on 1337 with ADUs and what the city's actually required to do. House Bill 1110 and 2321, as well as code amendments required. I'm just going to go really briefly to show you kind of what it's going to look like when we start working on the ordinances. In terms of the House Bill 1220, that's the requirement that's now in the RCWs from 2021, I believe, that required us to plan for and accommodate multiple types of housing for different housing income levels. So all of these suites of legislation came out in order to help us meet those goals and help us meet the housing needs of the state, which is estimated at 1 million new units by 2044. We're trying to remove barriers to housing for various income levels. One of our King County Council members likes to put it as our cities don't have to be, they can be expensive but not exclusive, so trying to take away those barriers and to have more sustainable and equitable growth. So again, meeting those different income needs for housing, as well as not going out and using additional resources by continuing to sprawl out into cities. Doing infill building helps in terms of not having to expand utilities out. So that's why a lot of these different housing bills came out in the last few years. House Bill 1054 will not affect the city's municipal code. It will affect HOAs who have requirements on restrictions on how many people can be living together in a home who are not related. However, there are still, they can no longer have those restrictions. However, they can still look to the RCWs and building code where there are restrictions on how many people can live together in a home. So we're not putting 10 people inside of a 100 square foot room.
Let's camp on that one for a second, and let me ask the commissioners if they have any questions about that aspect.
When we talk about House Bill 1337, accessory dwelling units, as some may already know, accessory dwelling units come in all different shapes and sizes, such as this illustration, which I found. They can be attached on the outside, they can be part of a basement or other floor level. They can be standalone detached, or even over a garage. When they're over a garage, we often call them carriage units. An ADU has to have, in order to qualify as an ADU, there has to be cooking, bathing, and sleeping quarters, I guess you could call it. And so, for example, when a project comes in and we see what you might think of as a wet bar, and it doesn't have a cooking, it might just have a sink and a small fridge. It might also have a guest room in this addition or whatever we see, and it might also have a bathroom, but without actual cooking facilities, we would not call that an ADU. So an ADU, really, you need to be able to cook a meal in there. let's see here,
I
sorry.
have a question on that.
Uh-huh.
Go ahead.
Excuse me, I understand our restrictions in the city of Newcastle for ADUs is 1,000 square feet. Did the state change that?
No, I'll get to that in just a minute. The Newcastle also has a 60% rule, whereas the entire square footage of the house and the ADU cannot be larger than 40% of that total square footage. We're gonna have to do away with that. But in terms of the gross square footage of an ADU, that's minimum 1,000 square feet now under the state code.
A minimum? You can't have an ADU that's less than 1,000 square feet?
Correct. Well, the requirement in our code, someone can build one smaller than that, but we can't require ADUs. Sorry, maximum square foot can be no larger than 1,000 square feet.
In other words, we can't impose a 1,000-foot maximum on that. You could, under the new state law, and then our code will have to adjust, somebody could build a 1,200 square foot ADU, is that?
No, I spoke wrong, I'm sorry. It can be the smallest amount of square footage that we can restrict as a maximum is 1,000 square feet. No ADU can, if we want to as a city, if we wanted to restrict to 900 square feet, we couldn't do that, but we can restrict to 1,000 square feet.
Okay.
Sorry.
Aaron? That was really helpful. Brian's question triggered a question I should have asked at the beginning. As we go through all of these, and I think I emailed you about this today, the most helpful thing for me is Newcastle law, new state law, what's the difference? Like, I think I have a pretty good understanding of where we're at compared to like House Bill 1110, I think. But if you could just, in addition to this great summary, kind of say, by the way, we need to change this in order to comply minimally. We can go above and beyond to, pursue the objectives of all these rules, because I think there were some close votes. I looked at the House bills. So there's a lot of, horse trading going on to figure out these rules, right? So there's the goals and aspirations of the people that are proposing these laws, and then there's what actually got put into place. So in order for us to get our city code in compliance with the new state law, I'd be interested in what that gap is, with the understanding that, this is the goals beyond just mere compliance.
Right.
So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Sure. That's in fact my next slide on this one. I always, we're like that. Anyway, so what can we do? We can completely restrict the use of ADUs for short-term rentals. We already do that. We can leave our code that way. Restrict ADUs on sites with critical areas. We already do that. Apply regulations that would be required for principal unit to an ADU. So we don't have to have special allowances for an ADU other than the fact that we have to allow them to exist. And then we can actually prohibit ADUs from R1 sites. So sites that are larger than an acre with environmental constraints. So if you've got a lot that has a tiny area to build on, we don't have to allow them to also build an ADU. And this goes for middle housing too. I'll talk a little bit about that after I get through the middle housing portion. So these are all the must-nots that you were asking about, Jim. We can't assess impact fees that are greater than 50% of the impact fees that would be imposed on a principal unit. We already don't do that. So all of these in white with check marks, Newcastle already has this in their code. All those, the two at the bottom are the ones that we're gonna have to change in our code, okay? Setback, tree retention, bulk and dimensional standards, we're good there. Impose public street improvements, we already don't do that. We don't already require people to put frontage sidewalks and whatnot if they're building an ADU. Restrict conversion of space such as garages into units, we do not restrict that now. And then restricting the roof height of no less than 24 feet, which right now we just impose our standard height limit, which is 30 feet. Not many people buy, I don't think I've seen many 30-foot tall ADUs unless they're including it as a carriage unit.
Aaron, is there a height limit on a principal unit?
It's 30 feet.
So,
It's the same on both sides. Yeah.
okay.
So then we're going back to that 1,000 square feet. So we're gonna have to change our code to only say an ADU should be no larger than 1,000 square feet unless something changes, unless the planning commission would like to propose something larger, we can do that. But we can't do anything. We can't impose a restriction smaller than 1,000 square feet. And then also we can no longer require a property owner or their kin to live on the property, either in the ADU or the principal unit. It has to be able to be rented out or even sold.
Sorry. Question about that last one, about requiring the property owner to reside in or occupy the ADU or other unit on the lot. If memory serves, and correct me if I'm wrong, that is also part of our short-term rental ordinances, I think.
Yeah,
Can we retain that in that ordinance?
yes.
Okay, great.
From what I saw in the bills, short-term rentals seem to be an exception, frequently an exception. Well, except in the case of a short-term rental, then you can do that if you want. So they're not trying to, this is really for permanent housing, more permanent forms of housing for people.
So I guess that raises a question potentially. Do you anticipate enforcement problems? Because, I mean, I guess I could see, what I would envision potentially is somebody says, hey, look, I'm going to build an ADU here, and of course, I live here, and then they move out 6 months after the ADU is completed, and they rent them both as short-term rentals.
Right.
And that's the sort of thing that until somebody complains, it's difficult for the city to know what's happening or to enforce the code around that. Do you personally, do you expect that there could be some challenges around enforcement for those kinds of things, or it could create some confusion?
I don't see it any different than what we have currently as an enforcement issue, because somebody could sign the affidavit and say they're going to live on the property, but they could be renting it out for all we know until, I shouldn't say that too loudly, but honestly, until we know that there's somebody who has a short-term rental or is renting it out. And we've had a couple of cases where we've had to talk to property owners, but so far people have been at least respectful.
What happens then?
Then they get a warning, then we go through our code violation, and we talk to them, and then eventually it can come to penalties and even liens against properties and whatnot if it gets serious enough. But we haven't had that happen yet. Parking. So the parking for middle housing, this is for ADUs still, but the parking for middle housing was changed when 2321 came out. So I'm going to tell you what the ADU law says, but I think what we're going to have to adhere to is what's in the middle housing law, because that was amended after 1337 came out. So parking, cities may not require more than one off-street parking space per unit on lots smaller than 6,000 square feet. Newcastle only requires one parking space in addition to that for the principal unit currently for ADUs.
I read the sentence 4 times, I still don't understand it, so can you kind of slow it down for me?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
does it apply or does it not apply? I don't understand the parenthetical statement, Newcastle's minimum lot size, what is that? I don't get it.
Newcastle's minimum lot size is 6,000 square feet,
Okay,
and we don't have any major transit stops yet. So,
would this apply to any lot in Newcastle? Because it says more than one, city may not require more than one off-street parking spot for anything smaller than 6,000. And then you said Newcastle has none of those, am I right?
correct. Well, I mean, unless they're grandfathered, right? Unless we have some non-complying.
Damn it, I thought I
legal
had it figured out.
non-compliances.
Okay,
But for the most part, no.
Okay.
We're not going to have people coming in and more often than not, Newcastle has really big lots if they're older. They're not small.
I have a question on that, follow up on Jim's. So on most of the new developments they're on 6,000 foot lots. That's the lot size now. And those are, in those new developments, does our existing ordinance say that the developer only has to provide one off-street parking place for those?
No, those are two.
Why are they two if it's, So I guess-
6,000 square feet. So all new single-family dwelling units, single-family homes require 2 parking spaces off-street. So our ADUs would only require, even currently only require 1 more parking spot.
So this is saying, in addition to the required 2, we can't require more than 1 more for the ADU,
Right,
but we can require 1 more for the ADU.
right.
Scott?
But it's going to get more
Wait a minute.
confusing when we,
Wait a minute. So it says, so reading, this is kind of a double negative, the way it's written here.
okay.
So can we talk about what we can require on lots that are 6,000 feet or larger? Can we
Let's,
require more than 1
Let's-
off-street parking space per unit?
this is really good because I won't talk about this with council next week. Let's scrap this slide because I think it's more confusing than it needs to be, and we have to talk about parking with middle housing.
Yeah,
Okay, so let's scrap this. We didn't see this slide.
okay,
Okay,
we'll move on.
middle housing.
I haven't
11
forgotten it.
Uh-huh. Okay, middle housing, 2321, modified, clarified, sort of, 1110. So middle housing, we have some definitions. Compatible in scale, form, and character with single-family houses, but they contain 2 or more attached or clustered dwellings. So cottage housing is kind of this anomaly. Unit lot subdivisions, you're gonna hear me talking about this. And this is where, let's say, so you see the boxes here, and the squares, let's say that's a 6,000 square foot lot.
Yeah.
In some jurisdictions, you would be able to then further subdivide this into 4 lots. And those can be sold fee simple. Now in Newcastle, it's only gonna be 2. But that could be a single family home and an ADU. Or it could be a duplex, and that makes it so that you can sell each unit independently without having to condoize them, basically. Both middle housing and ADUs talk about unit lot subdivision. So we have to add unit lot subdivision to our code. Some cities already have it, we don't.
When you say in Newcastle it's only 2, are you talking about existing law, or are you talking about what the state now requires of us to do under the new law?
Under the new law, Newcastle would have to allow a unit lot subdivision of 2 units. So those would be units that, it starts as, 6,000 square feet or larger lot, and then gets subdivided into what's called a unit lot.
So, by example, if we had a 6,000 square foot lot, we could create 2 3,000 square foot lots.
Yes, if you meet the criteria.
And what's the minimum that we could create? Could we create 6 1,000 square foot lots?
No, because we only have to allow 2.
Okay.
So in Newcastle's code, we can say when we put unit lot subdivisions in our code, we can restrict it to the maximum number of units on the lot. Now, if we have I'm gonna get out there. If you have let's say we had a townhouse project come in and they went through a conditional use permit and it was approved. Let's say that happened. Then we could allow them to do unit lot subdivisions in that instance. So that's just something we're gonna have to think about further down the line. But right now, we just need to know that unit lot subdivisions exist and we're gonna have to put them in our code. And that means what that does is it allows us to sell these units, independently of one another. Uh-oh,
So Aaron, we don't do any unit lot subdivision today.
no. All
So
those
this will be a brand new concept for Newcastle.
for Newcastle, right?
Okay.
So, for example, at Lee Bima, rather than they condoized all those new homes that are being built. Those could have been unit lot subdivisions, where they just each had these smaller units and owned, which would include the land under the building.
I know we're gonna talk about parking later, so I'm not gonna make you answer this now, but
Okay.
I am going to want to understand if, resident owns 6,000 square foot lot and, there's a requirement for parking associated with the 6,000 square foot lot. And resident wants to have 2 units on 6,000 square foot lot. There are parking requirements that are associated with the 6,000 square foot or larger lot. They do a unit lot subdivision. Those parking restrictions would no longer apply to either of those 3,000 square foot lots? Or would those carry through the unit lot subdivision? Is it a way to get around those types of development requirements?
So I think the parking restriction would then go with the unit type. So if someone comes in and says, I'm going to subdivide a house and an ADU, you would have 2 for the house and 1 for the ADU.
Is this law in effect yet?
Yes.
Really?
I think it's been signed.
I just looked it up this today and it said it didn't have all, I tried to, because you emailed me the bill numbers today, so I downloaded them all and was looking at them as fast as I could. I don't think this one's been passed.
Well, some of this comes from 1110. A lot of this,
I got the 1110 passed
Right,
long
last
ago.
year.
I'm talking about this 2123.
right,
2123, am I missing something, right?
2321.
Did I mistype it?
I think I mistyped it before. I transposed the numbers in my draft. So 2321.
2123. Is that a law yet?
So there, I don't know if the governor has signed it yet or not.
It is?
2321.
Ah, so 23, oh, that's, okay.
Sorry, I think that was my fault, but,
That explains a lot, thank you. No, we're
all
good.
my fault.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Major transit stops, from what I can tell, fixed rail or bus rapid transit has to be, so when we talk about parking requirements near a major transit stop, it has to be a planned bus rapid transit stop. Like people, they have to know where it is. It has to be in design. So at this point, we don't have any. We know at one point we may have bus rapid transit going through Newcastle, but that's slated for 2050 right now. So we have some time. Okay. Yeah.
So trying to think this through about, again, somebody's got a 6,000 square foot lot. They have a small detached ADU off kind of on one side of the lot. Is the city of Newcastle allowed to restrict the minimum size of a lot that is the result of a unilot subdivision such that you don't end up with a 4,500 square foot lot and a 1,500 square foot lot, and you start to get these little spin-off tiny like chunks? I mean, that just seems like a nightmare for lots of logistical reasons when it comes to utilities or taxes. I mean, it seems like that could be a problem if you can't restrict that.
So somehow the property, whoever's doing the subdivision, so I'm going to call them the property owner would have to show how they're handling utilities and whatnot. So it could either be because remember it's only 2 units allowed on the lot. So it could be where it's, half and half, so 2 units that way, and then the utilities are separate. Or the utilities would be through some sort of, like an HOA,
So
where they're shared.
let's set aside the utility thing. That creates, I think, a distraction to the question I was really intending to ask, which is there a control that the city can decide it wants to place on the size of that smaller lot? Can we say as a city, I'm not suggesting that we will or won't or should or shouldn't, city council's gonna need to decide what they think is appropriate, obviously, but if the city looks at this and says, look, it's in our best interest not to have 500 square foot tax lots in the city of Newcastle, could result from this, could the city say, no unilot subdivision lot can result in a lot that is less than 3,000 square feet or 2,500, some minimum lot size for that,
I
based on
will,
what's in the law.
I will have to look at that, but my understanding is that if it's not if it's not part of the fee simple lot, then it's part of a, like, commonly owned area. So, just like you would have, okay, let's say at a larger subdivision, you would have, let's say you had 4 6,000 square foot units plus you had a park tract. Or let's say the parking was shared, or you had a shared driveway that went across. Those shared parks, shared driveways, those would all be under a commonly owned interest, like a commonly owned tract.
Right, so maybe I'm misunderstanding the scope of this, I apologize if I am. So if Brian owns a 6,000 square foot lot as a resident here in the city, and it isn't part of a new development, and he's got an ADU in the corner of his 6,000 square foot lot, and he wants to do a unilot subdivision because he wants to sell the ADU with a tract of land to me, thanks, can he carve off any amount of his lot to sell to me, as long as there are like setbacks that are consistent with code? I mean, it's like, can it be a 500 square foot lot? Can it be any lot, or can the city of Newcastle say, no, if you're gonna do this, it has to be half of the lot or something like that?
So to thoroughly answer your question, I'm going to have to look at it. Right now, anything I say is, because I haven't looked into unit lot subdivision as much. I just know that the way I'm thinking about it is, it has to do with the footprint of the lot and the requirements in the RCWs for us, for any kind of subdivision, right? Access utilities, all those kinds of things. But maybe so. Sorry. Yeah.
Aaron, I also have a follow-on question. So, say the 6,000 square feet, can the person have like 1,000 for the ADU, another 5,000 for a duplex, or something basically more than one family lives there?
On the same lot?
Yes.
Yes.
So that means that the lot, 6,000 lots can actually have 3?
No. Oh, sorry. No, if, so the change, I haven't gotten there yet. So we only have to allow 2 units per lot now, of any kind. So it can be duplexes, that would be 2. Single family home and an ADU, that would be 2. It's 2. From the AWC is the most recent thing we've heard is the interpretation is, if you're a tier 3 city, you only have to allow 2 units per lot. If you have ADUs as one of your types of housing, which I assume the city of Newcastle will want to impose that. So,
I'm sorry, I've got one more question, then I will stop. I don't want to monopolize, but I guess I see an issue here too, where, and I think maybe it's just a matter of understanding it better, but if you've got a 6,000 square foot lot and you carve off 2,000 square feet to go with an ADU, and you've got a primary resident on the 4,000 foot lot, the next question I guess I have is, if I'm in the 4,000 square foot lot, the home that's on that lot, then can I do a second ADU and do a second subdivision of that? And is there an opportunity to kind of violate the intent of what I think we're using as the example here?
mm-hmm.
And I guess I want to, I'm thinking about how do we control that in a way that it doesn't just kind of spin into something that's not intended.
Right.
So, and I guess there's no question that, it's a comment. I'm trying to voice a concern around it.
Well, to help with that concern, once there's a unit lot subdivision, we're not required to allow further unit lot subdivisions. Like that's it for under the parent property is still the parent property, and there's still just 2 units.
So is that then a special designation that that tax lot would carry with it going forward?
Most likely, the subdivision is, the plat maps show the parent parcel and the units.
So that would, even after sales and things like that, that would be something that, yeah, that's what I'm worried about, is that over time it gets lost. Thanks.
So for parking, these are the standards that apply to type tier 3, which we're tier 3, middle housing for the state. Off-street parking within 1/2 mile of a major transit stop. We're
Excuse
not
me.
allowed to require,
What's the definition of a major transit stop?
that was fixed rail and bus rapid transit. None. Bus rapid transit is not planned for the city until 2050. And once we have stops, then we would have to start enacting, once we have stations planned, which might not even be for a couple more comp plans, that's when we would have to start planning for that in our code.
I'm gonna go back to my original thing at the very, very beginning when I was emailing you, like, just, like, that's what I love about red lines when I'm doing contracts, like, what's the difference, right? Like, so, like, this first bullet point, totally true, but doesn't affect us. I'm not saying I don't care, but I don't care, you know what I'm saying? So, like, for the purposes of all this stuff, I'm trying to keep my brain learning as fast as I can the past, like, 4 months. If you could just spoon feed me, Aaron, with, okay, it's just,
Right.
this is the part that applies to us, where we have to, you know, where we have to make the changes, that'd be so helpful for me.
Sure.
I swear, I'm trying not to ask dumb questions, but it's.
No,
it's-
there are no dumb questions. I was just
Okay.
trying to point out, this is what the state says.
Got it, cool.
So the first one does not apply to us. The second one, more than one off-street parking space, this will apply to us. Because they changed the language to on lots no greater than 6,000 square feet. We currently, our minimum lot size is 6,000 square feet. So for middle housing units, duplexes, ADUs, if we decide to allow stacked flats, we're not allowed to require more than one off-street parking on lots that are 6,000 square feet. 6,001, it goes up. Often we don't have a perfect 6,000 square foot. This is something we're going to have to talk about as we get into the code. So just know that this is how it's written.
If I were an owner that wanted to get the most money out of my property, I'd want to say this is 6,000 on the dot, right? The law says 6,000. I'm gonna get a survey that says 6,000 and no inches, right? Just so I can do one parking unit and make the most of the property instead of having to put 2 damn parking spots on the spot, right?
Right.
Okay, and is that, do we have that level of detail? We don't have that level of detail, I'm guessing, right? Like, if I came in and I said, hey, I only need 1 parking spot, would we say, prove it? Would we say, do you have 6,000 and not 6,001 square feet?
We get those, when a subdivision comes in, they do give us the square footage based on survey calculations. So they're pretty close.
Wait, so, I'm sorry, now I got a question. So if I have a 6,000 square foot lot, I can build one big single-family home with a 1-car garage?
2, because that is not middle housing. This is only for middle housing.
Oh, gotcha.
It's kind of an incentive for middle housing, if you think about it.
So if I have a 6,000 square flat and it's empty now and I'm gonna build a duplex on there, that only needs 2 parking places off-street.
Right. More than 2 off-street spaces per unit on lots greater than 6,000 square feet. Well, that's what we already require. So this last one applies to us, it's what we already require. I mentioned that we have 3 tiers of cities. I probably should have said that earlier. Newcastle's a tier 3 city. So again, 2 units per lot must be allowed. ADUs may count towards this density, and we're not required to allow density types beyond the requirement. So I don't know for those of you who've read the older middle housing bills, but they said you must adopt 6 of the 9 types, and it didn't make sense when you only had to allow 2. So they've done away with that. We're only allowed to adopt what we want to that allows up to the 2 units. Exceptions, critical areas, this is just like anything else in our city. When you have a lot that's completely covered by critical areas, you have to go through a special process. And you're only allowed to build what's considered what's reasonable, which is typically a single-family home. And from everything I've heard so far, it's not going to change for critical areas at this point. HOA covenants are still enforceable. So I know this has been a big question. They're still enforceable if your covenants still require only one unit. That's all you can build on your lot. The city does not enforce that, and we're not doing real research on that. So that's up to HOAs and their residents to figure that out.
I think we talked about, like, it'd be curious, I mean, we're not like New York City or San Francisco, right? We're a fairly small town with, like, I don't know, 20 HOAs, I don't even know what it is. Olympus is huge.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if we could figure out how much space applies to this. I mean, clearly the transit thing, I was wondering, like, Brian, like, how much of our space is within a half-mile transit? I couldn't think of anything, and your answer was none yet. I was also wondering, like, how much of this applies to Newcastle, right? Like, if half of the property's critical areas and a third of the property is HOAs, that leaves like a slice of the city to deal with these changes.
Yeah, I think one way to look at it would be those units that are built before a certain time because their HOAs are no longer intact. And there are some HOAs, I've looked through, just out of curiosity, I've looked through some of the CCNRs. I asked for CCNRs. Olympus, the Vineyard, White Hawk. There were a number of them that didn't allow it. Some of them surprisingly didn't say anything about it. So, but yeah.
Wait, before you move on that last slide, actually, sorry, one more slide. Newcastle allows cottage housing, right?
Mhm.
Can you explain what is the definition of a cottage house?
Yeah, so, okay, this is our cottage housing standards. So what it is it, well, that's probably not interesting, but what it is you have a courtyard in the middle, and then you have smaller units around that courtyard. And it depends on the density of the lot. I think our code says no fewer than 4, and then there are maximum sizes for them, and I think it's 16. It would be helpful if it had that. No cottage shall be more than 1,500 square feet, and no more than 30% of the cottages may be larger than 1,300 square feet. So it's really just a little development of smaller units.
Yeah.
They're adorable. I've seen them in other cities. They are really cool.
Because nobody's built one here, right?
Mm-mm.
Well, why is that, do you think?
Pemrose is, those are condominiums.
Oh.
Yeah. But those are two and those are true triplexes and duplexes.
I don't have a question, I have a statement.
Well,
Okay.
real quick though, cottage housing though is a form of middle housing though, right?
Yes.
So if it's already in our code, like why has nobody ever built one? Is it just better? Does it make more money to build a big house?
A lot of people have wanted those big houses.
Interesting. Okay.
Okay, here's my statement, not my question. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
We've seen Gosgothorpe, we've seen Mark, we've seen you. This is the best meeting I can remember for our planning commission. We haven't asked you a question you don't know the answer to. Charlie's letting us kind of go free. This has been so helpful. This has been the most helpful half an hour in my years here. So thank you, Erin.
Oh, good. Thank you.
I have a question, Aaron, about HOAs. Does the state requirement that you can't limit the number of unrelated people, can HOAs that have a limit in place, is that limit grandfathered just as the prohibition on ADUs?
My understanding
fine.
is it's not grandfathered. It's just no longer valid.
Okay, so it doesn't matter what your homeowners association said, that's a state requirement that applies to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
And at first I wondered if that came from an angle, like, if you recall in our own code, we used to have something that said you can only have like 6 unrelated people living in the same building, but it applied to foster children. So at first I was wondering if that was the intent of 1054, but it says in it that it's from that suite of housing bills and just trying to create housing for more people. So,
I think it's also an equitability issue. Ultimately, it's just like the state can come in and they can supersede contracts that have, you know, like old CCNRs have redlining types of restrictions. I think it's the same idea.
so code amendments required, and I really do want to let Jim and Paul talk tonight. So just conceptually, when we're looking at the amount of time that I think it's going to take us to get through some of these, and we'll probably honestly be working on everything at the same time just so that we can present something more, and we'll talk about this. I'm just saying, I think we could do it all around the same time just so that we're presenting something more holistic to City Council when it comes, and to the public when it comes to be that time. ADUs, I think that's going to be really straightforward. It's just making some modifications to our existing code. Middle housing, there's a lot more that we can do that's more discretionary in terms of design, lot coverages. It's going to affect what we have currently for single-family home, but there's also a model code put out by the state that we can start with. So that's a really big help because it already has all the required points in it and they're already pointed out. So I think that's going to take at least 6 months of us talking to each other about these, just if we have one meeting a month. And then unit lot subdivision, I think that will take less time once we have our head wrapped around it. It's a technical thing more so than there's nothing really, does it or does it not meet these survey requirements is really what it's going to come down to in the end. Because I think we're going to have a lot of discussions about minimum lot sizes and whatnot when we're talking about middle housing, and if we want to change anything that's currently in our zoning. Just so you know, this is our current, everything that we have for single-family homes right now. And this is our use table on the right for residential units. So the way this works is you can see this R1 through 6 column, and this is what's allowed. So right out permitted, single-family homes, cottage housing, then multifamily, mobile homes, senior citizen assisted. Those are all conditional use permits. So that goes through the hearing examiner. And that's in the R1 zone. And that could stay that way, but we still have to add in duplexes to this. And then when you get to our requirements, you can see single-family residential. We have these different requirements in the different residential zones. Again, we're talking about minimum lot sizes, street width, lot width, width at the street in case of a cul-de-sac, side setbacks, front setbacks, rear setbacks, height limits. So we could do the same thing for middle housing. We could add a section and do that for middle housing and have them all be the same. And then we would just do anything that's special, kind of like what we did here for cottage housing developments, where we say, okay, well, we want some articulation on the facade so that it doesn't look like just, a mirrored image of itself for duplexes or something like that. Some cities get a little fancier. This tier 3 cities. This is from the model code. This is optional, but these are suggested design elements, like having windows and doors, how many windows and doors and entries. And then they get really fancy, and this is form-based code down here on the right. This is Cincinnati. There are other cities that do this, and this is actually where they're telling you what the form of the building has, what dimensions the form of the building have to meet with. And if we're going to do something like that, I think that's maybe further down the line. There may be a few things we can pull in that are form-based, but there's a lot of work that goes into a form-based code. So that is where we are on this, and I hope I didn't just confuse you more.
That's great.
So I hope And if you have more questions, please send them my way. Okay.
Okay, commissioners, if you have no more questions, we'll get into the next item on our agenda, which I'm sure will take us a good amount of time, which is to begin discussing the housing element. You ready for that? So for the benefit of anybody who watches this meeting or is here, this is a continuation of a process that started many months ago, where each planning commissioner took responsibility for a particular element of the existing comprehensive plan. They took responsibility for making recommendations for that element, for listening carefully and for what Newcastle citizens want in that area. And I guess I should have mentioned that first. Listening first, then making recommendations, and then submitting those recommendations to the rest of the commission. We held a special meeting on March 9th, I believe, where we went through 3 or 4 of the other elements of the comprehensive plan. And tonight we're continuing that process with 2 elements, if we can have time to get through them, with housing being the first one. And so what we did before was to just go through page by page and look at the recommendations that the commissioner who is responsible for that plan made, but also adding our own input to it and questioning it, suggesting changes. So the object of this discussion is to come away with a consensus among the commission about what changes we would recommend to that element of the plan. Those would then be sent in writing to our consultant, who would take that as direction that they should write into a draft plan that will come back to us at a certain point. That draft plan could be structured differently than our existing comprehensive plan, but the content, and in particular the recommended changes, would be contained in that draft plan so that we could then review it and see how they surfaced in that plan and make sure that they conform to the intent that we had in sending those to the consultant. There was one other point I wanted to make, and I'm forgetting it. So, commissioners, can you think of anything that is significant that I left out about this process?
I just want to say that the first page is a series of questions that we were all kind of asked to, for our element to provide comments to, and that's what the first page is. The following pages are right out of the comprehensive plan with specific suggestions.
Thank you, and you reminded me what I was going to say, and that is the document that Vice Chair Kennard was referring to is available to on the city's website. It was added there today, so if you didn't see it earlier, you can go there now and open it. And it is, I don't recall what the name of it is, but I think it has housing in there someplace in the title. So with that as the introduction, we will go over this page by page. So let's just take a minute to review the first page, and I'll stop you in a couple minutes and see if we can go on to the next page.
This, right?
Yes.
Is there a way for the people that are sitting, watching us to look at this?
And there were hard copies available to them here.
Oh, hey, all right. So there's a copy for you to look at if you want. Thank you.
So I see that some of you have already gone past the first page, and I want to draw your attention to the series of bullets under the bullet housing, referring to HOP2, HOP4, and this refers to policies in the existing comprehensive plan. And HO is for housing, and then P2, P4, those are the different policies. These are policies that predated the change in the legislation that Aaron just described for us. I guess I have a question for Aaron. I know many of these policies here, the intent remains regardless of what the change in the state law. For example, HOP2, the city shall protect the quality and character of existing family neighborhoods as described in the land use element. That is still something that we want to do, but we want to do it consistent with the state law. So do we need to pay any attention to these policies, or I should say, what kind of attention do we need to pay to these policies and giving direction to our consultants? Other than, could we say, we want to continue to honor the intent of this, just write them so that they are in conformance with state law? Is that an approach that we could take?
Yeah, I think so. I think we could say that. I think from an equity standpoint, when I was doing the review for equity in our code, we actually have some clashes between our affordable housing goals and our neighborhood goals. And so I don't know if we want to characterize what a single family neighborhood is to us. Is it the scale, the form? Is it what is that's attractive about it? And I think what we're going to see, and what I've seen from the survey, is that people really want the more intense density downtown, and they want less density in the neighborhoods. So if there's a way to clarify what that is, I think we should consider it with the consultants, if that makes sense. Can we get away from the term single family and get into a term that still keeps the scale and the character?
So, two thoughts. One, I think talking about single-family detached housing, I think that is a term of art, and I think we know what that means, and I don't know if that is enough further definition there to clarify what I think the intent. I think that's what the intent is there, is we're talking about neighborhoods that are primarily detached houses, single-family detached houses, where you have one residence, one dwelling unit per tax lot. So I don't know if that is enough of a distinguisher there. But I do think that's a term of art in the industry and in the code. And I maybe it's an oversimplification. I guess my second thought is my take on the feedback that we've received has been consistently, generally, not entirely, but generally, respondents to our outreach have wanted us to do the minimum that's required in terms of opening the door to middle housing and multifamily in what are traditionally, and I'll use the term again, single family residential neighborhoods. And I wonder if it would be appropriate to say, to the extent not in conflict with existing law, with state or other law, or to the extent permitted under other superseding law, the city would protect the quality of, these characters. Yeah, while complying with state laws is an edit that Jim made further in the document.
I'm interrupting, but what you're saying there then is that when we go to permit middle housing is contradictory to the comprehensive plan. If we use the term single-family housing, predominantly single-family housing, then we're excluding those middle housing units.
we're not where superseding law says you can't. And I guess that's my point, is that this is a policy statement. This isn't a code provision. And if the policy is, except where, compliance with state law requires a different result, the overarching sentiment in the community is, we're a bedroom community and we have neighborhoods that have a certain character. And I don't think that isn't a loaded term. I think it's a real thing. Go ahead.
But these terms have to be vertically consistent with our ordinances. And
Yep.
these terms become what's on our zoning maps and our land use maps. So I would argue that these terms do matter, and they matter to the people.
I'm not saying they don't matter, to be
Yeah.
clear. So don't assume that I'm saying that. I recognize that these terms matter.
Right.
And I guess I agree that there are requirements at law by the state that we need to comply with. And I think what we're hearing is people want us to do what we're required to do and not do more than that. Because to do more than that would be a bigger change than what they want. And I think we need to be, just like we need to be careful about being, not using terms that are inequitable and not using things here that are gonna conflict with state law. I think we also need to be careful to honor that sentiment. And maybe there's disagreement among the commission about whether or not that is the general sentiment of the community, and that's a different discussion. But I think to the extent that it is, I think we need to keep that in here as well and not lose it. And I'm afraid that that's what's happening here.
I don't disagree.
So I completely agree with your observation about what seemed like the majority of residents want, which is no change. However, we're required by the state to have duplexes allowed within single families and ADUs. So if we're able to just simply scratch out existing single family, just scratch out single family, then it says quality and character of existing neighborhoods. I mean, it doesn't mention those changes, but it does mention the quality and character.
Or low-density residential.
Well, I was even gonna say,
Yeah.
single family, replace that with the word residential. I don't know.
I think that's a good point, because you may see changes in character in mixed use. I mean, we've been talking about that here where we have these shopping centers. You could have a real change in character based on development that is permitted there. So, I mean, the idea, Paul, that you raised, I like that. I think that's,
Yeah. Makes it a little more generic, but, I don't know, keeps the policy, I guess. I don't know.
Most of the other policies listed here are actually consistent with the new direction of the state law, I think. And with the direction that we've talked about going, if we honor the feedback that we've gotten, where we're going to focus development in the downtown area.
Mm-hmm.
Just clarification, because I can't remember. Is multifamily a duplex?
Technically.
It is?
Technically. Mm-hmm. I would think that we need to make the distinction between density, low density, existing, and they're not going to use these word for word in our new codes, but the point is that we want to keep the existing character outside of the downtown and focus high density residential close to the community center.
So just add high density.
Yeah, something along those lines.
So the first one's, P2 says the city shall protect the quality and character of existing single-family neighborhoods. And then P4 says the city shall focus multifamily housing developments close to the center. So one says single family, the other one says multifamily. Are we gonna change both those? Is that what you're proposing?
I'm proposing that we look at it in terms of density or housing type, or I think SCJ maybe they've seen some different terms that we could consider.
Would that be like new in the entire country, or is that, because I mean, I've heard the term single family like a zillion times, right?
Right.
We're just proposing like a new word,
We're not,
or
maybe not,
a new definition, or.
Right. or
Okay.
just a new descriptor for it, because
I guess I'm not sure. Sorry. When we say protect the quality and the character of existing single-family neighborhoods, I don't really see it's contradicted with the law. Meaning, we are still in compliance if the law says you can do 2 units. We just protect, we just don't not encourage, but promote or give some incentive to people to do 2 units. My point is, I actually think if we can keep this word, I don't know, I feel like if we strike this out, I think there's basically the description is lost. What is the neighborhood?
if I may, I'd like to come back with some proposed terms.
Aaron, can you put up the table that we had that was in the prior presentation, that was the zoning table from 1808-030, please? I'd be curious to see what we currently have in there.
Single detached?
So we've got single detached, we've got multifamily, adult family, we've got single family residential, and multifamily residential. I mean, that's in our code currently. I mean, go ahead, Jim, sorry.
I agree with Scott and Maggie. I think the language works the way it is. Single-family residential, multifamily residential, it's the term I've heard a zillion times over the years. And I don't think allowing ADUs and duplexes in single-family residential neighborhoods means we need to not call it a single-family residential neighborhood. I mean, like, you know, if you have like an all-black college and a white guy goes to the all-black college, it's still an all-black college, right? Like if you have a single-family residential neighborhood and a duplex goes in or an ADU goes in, that doesn't mean it's no longer a single-family residential neighborhood. It's just, you know, like you said, we're complying with state law, but renaming the neighborhoods seems, it doesn't, I don't know that we have to do that. I agree with Scott and Maggie. I don't know what Brian and I don't know what you guys think.
I just don't think it fits what's going to happen. It's not going to be a single-family neighborhood potentially. You're going to have duplexes. So it's no longer an accurate description of that area. It's still residential, and we still want to protect the character of what's there, which we can do in terms of design and size and those kinds of things, but that's my opinion.
I think if that neighborhood, most of it say is HOA, and the HOA has their covenant, does not allow any ADU. And then there is another neighborhood, there's no HOA, and there is one, say, ADU there. But with that one single lot has ADU, it doesn't change the whole neighborhood as a single-family neighborhood.
I agree.
And we're talking about defined terms here too. I mean, we're talking, and we can define these get defined in the code as defined terms, right? That's the point of this table. So, and I appreciate your point, Brian, but and not to be dismissive at all, because you're right, there is gonna be change here, and we need to understand what that looks like. And, you know, you can call it a single-family residential neighborhood. You can change that, and you can call it, you know, primarily detached home residential neighborhood. I mean, we can call it whatever we want, and it's what comes underneath of that is the definition that's gonna make the difference. And I guess I think that when, to a degree, we're kind of splitting hairs, because my sense is, and maybe I'm mistaken, when we're all talking about single-family neighborhoods here, we know what we're talking about. And when we're talking about multifamily residential, we know what we're talking about. We're talking about higher density. We're talking about apartment complexes like we have here right off of Coal Creek Parkway. We have mixed use like what we've been talking about for, you know, in these commercial districts. And I think we know what we're talking about. And I want to be really careful that, you know, if there's a change here, and I'm not suggesting that maybe ultimately there shouldn't be, but, you know, I don't want to be just dismissive of the, you know, the majority of the use in a given neighborhood, because there is going to potentially be, you know, a duplex here or a duplex there or an ADU here. To me, it feels like it's a change that in terminology that's being made that is going to create more confusion than clarity.
Commissioner Vanatta, hold on. Commissioner Vanatta, you had a comment you wanted to make? Paul?
Oh, sorry. Hold that thought.
I was just gonna suggest that we table the discussion until Aaron has a chance to kind of consider it in context of the larger document.
I think that's a good suggestion.
The context of the larger document is HB 1110 literally has single-family zones as a defined term. Single-family zone means those zones where single-family detached housing is a predominant land use. It's a defined term within the bill we're accommodating.
Well,
I don't know. I haven't even thought about this issue before, but I don't know.
In the current comp plan, in the glossary, multifamily residential is defined, mixed-use developments is defined, but single-family is not defined. So there's actually no definition for this.
So let's let Erin work this problem. She knows our feelings about it. And we've got a lot of other stuff we'd like to talk about tonight. So let's let her work on it so we can keep going.
Thank you.
Can I bring up another topic off page 1?
Sure.
All right, there were at least 3 bullets, maybe 4, that said safety should be added as a new comp plan element.
Separate issue altogether. Ignore them.
Ignore it altogether? So we're not
Well-
going to add it as a new element? Because I was going to say, I mean, there's required elements, there's some optional elements. Safety is not any of those.
This is me typing stuff that I was thinking one night long ago. So I think it's something that we should discuss. I don't know if it's what we're supposed to discuss with her now.
Well, I might defer this to the chair, but I would think with it being 7:15 and we still have the rest of this to get through, let's table the safety discussion for now.
Okay,
Yep.
okay.
Yeah, I don't think safety is going to go away. I think, but it's an optional element. And I think after we get through these other ones, we could turn our attention to it and figure out how best to handle it. It might just be that we agree that we're going to add that in our next comp plan.
Well, I guess where I'm going with it is when you get to my economic one, I quote some of the RCW where it lists these are the required elements.
Yeah.
And there's some optional elements. I didn't read the whole thing. I don't remember if you can add your own, you know, like creative optional element. Like
City of Seattle has 13
that they just-
elements.
that aren't in RCW.
It's all variety. They have
They just added them. So, okay.
they have elements that are relevant to City of Seattle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Things relating to ports and waterfronts and.
Okay, can we move on to the next page or the next pages? Let's just take 2 pages at a time here. I would say let's go to the element.
The red line There's one red line that's important within the introduction, not the safety one, Paul. Where it says land use element, transportation element, parks element, under housing element, it says, all the proposed multifamily housing will be located near the community business center and on Coal Creek Parkway, or near the Community Creek Parkway, or whatever that said. That's the one red line you'll find within the introduction to answer the question that somebody asked. Can we skip to the housing element? I only put one red line in the beginning, which is to say, instead of saying it's all gonna be located, we could maybe change that from located to like concentrated or focused or something.
Anybody have any objection to that? It's on page IN6. If there's no objection, then let's consider that approved, and let's move to the housing element. And let's look at the first two pages of the housing element. Yeah. Yeah.
Quick question for Commissioner Quigg as we review this. So I appreciate that there are red lines in here. You've gone through in a number of areas and highlighted, but there's no comment. Can you provide a little guidance what your intentions were?
Just highlighting parts that caught my attention. That's all that is.
I have a question for Director Fitzgibbons on the changes, the new policies, HO, G5 and G6. Do you see any conflict there with any other laws or ordinances that, anything else that would have to, that would be, that exists now, but that would be in conflict with this?
I think the idea is to keep as community character. I think this is okay. Adequate policing. I don't think that belongs in the housing goal here, just because existence of adequate policing is determined right now by King County and our budget. But there are requirements for utilities and roadways already in the RCWs and in the code. So if we want to consider safety as a design option, then perhaps the better way is to do that through design considerations. That is something that is enforceable or that we can look at. But policing is I think that should be separate.
Would it be appropriate, instead of saying policing, I was going to propose services, but that maybe is too general. I guess I'm thinking about things like not just utilities, but sidewalks, transit, other infrastructure. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that would go along with the concurrency requirements, which we already have. So that's, this is consistent with state law.
The reason I put policing is because we heard it over and over and over again. I mean, the guy right there, the council member, is starting a special policing or crime prevention committee or commission or whatever he's doing. I mean, it's like the biggest focus I was hearing when I was out walking the streets years ago. It's the thing we heard in the penny poll. We had to add an extra jar for it. In the survey results, it's the word that popped up, you know, small, safe, whatever the other one was, peaceful or something like that. So that's why I put it in there. Because literally, because I wrote this weeks ago, and you know, after when that was all echoing through my mind, which is why Paul's like, why is there so much mention of safety in Quig's housing stuff? It's because it was what I kept on. I was trying to echo what I was reading as I was going through everything. So that's why that's in there. And yes, concurrency does require that we have infrastructure and roads and, you know, all the other stuff. I put policing in there specifically just to reflect what I was reading at the time when I did these highlights in answer to the questions that you sent. And just while I got the microphone, and if you see HOP4, like Scott was saying, I put while complying with state law. I was trying to figure out how we could bring that up to speed. So that's why you see those three red lines, Aaron.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, under P7, the city shall also consider manufactured homes the same as single-family homes. Is that true today? In our
Yeah.
code?
We don't have many people building manufactured homes in the city. It hasn't,
I'm wondering if we should just take that out as a policy.
mix of housing types and densities, including housing. I think maybe manufactured homes are considered sometimes more affordable than building straight from doing wood construction. So I think maybe that was the point of it.
Yeah,
So it may be redundant with other policies.
well, I guess personally, I don't want to see a manufactured home in Newcastle.
Some of them,
I'd rather, you can build a small house, but I'd rather it was stick-built on a foundation.
well, there's like the mobile type, and then they're manufactured where they put them on a permanent foundation. And some of them are really cool.
Maybe.
I'll send some examples out. But if we want to take, I mean, I won't have heartache over taking it out of the comp plan.
It's just I don't love it, but you know, we get to vote, I guess, on it.
Anybody object to removing that? No, no objections.
I'm crossing it off.
I guess I would comment on, and I'm looking at P10 and P11, affordable housing, and also P6 with mixed use and mixed income developments. You know, it's my understanding that other municipalities in the area are looking at things, particularly around like mixed use developments and incentives to consider, you know, for example, here of our mixed use, I'm trying to remember, and Aaron, you can correct me. I think that the mixed use, so like where the Safeway and the QFC is, isn't that like if you have one retail and 4 residential over it? And I think that's what our code is currently, but
Yep.
if it's not, go with me. Anyway, you know, I think other municipalities are looking at programs like if you have, you know, a certain percentage of units in that type of development that are at 50% AMI or less, that you can get an extra floor, right? So instead of going to 4, you can go to 5 or you can go to 6, and it changes the economics of the development and it creates an incentive. I don't know if that's too specific here. Charlie and I were talking about that earlier here. It might be too specific, but those are the kinds of creative sorts of incentives and programs I think it's worth considering if we're, serious about, again, responding to feedback that is looking at the bulk of higher density development and increased housing units being in that core area. I think there's an opportunity for those types of solutions.
Right, and we do have some incentives in our code right now. I would think if we want to strengthen the goals, the goal or the policy would be around get more creative. More is the directive, right? It's do more. Right now, we only require moderate for our density incentives. So the downtown, you can build up to where Safeway and QFC are 3 stories, and then you have to start setting back. And then in order to build those additional floors, you have to get the density incentives, one of which is affordable housing. Others are open space, trails, other kinds of incentives.
Would it be possible to include, I think, I may not get the acronym right again, but I think it's SEPTED. Is it the safety, could you include incorporation of those standards as a basis for an incentive as well for those types of developments?
We could, or we could require it outright.
I like that a lot, actually.
Yeah, I don't know if, it doesn't change the affordability, and if we're looking at income bands, I'd rather see developers put, have a cover sheet of form that shows us what they did to help make it a safer development to live in, and meet those criteria.
Aaron, for today, like the downtown area, if the apartment, if the developer is doing the apartment, is there any restrictions, like what kind of apartment? The reason I'm saying is I think there is some new type of apartment. I forgot what it's called. Basically, they have unit, but they have a common kitchen or something. Do we have something to forbid this type of thing, or it's also all open?
Yeah, our code would call those dormitories, because it's older code. Those are also called single residence, SROs, single resident occupants buildings. And that is one of a housing bill I didn't talk about because it's just a change to our code where we have to outright allow those in our multifamily housing. But yeah, it's co-living spaces is what that
So we will
It's-
allow those?
in our multifamily. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think you just said something that we just ought to note, and that is, this is a type of housing that's very different than what we have in Newcastle. It's the type of housing that we have to allow in multifamily apartment areas, but it's also going to be something that'll be a surprise to Newcastle residents. So when it comes to the point where we are looking at changing our code so that it reflects this, we have to make sure that this is a very visible thing to people, so they understand why it's there and that it is there.
Maggie just asked a question about something I'd never heard about, thought about before 30 seconds ago. So if that's something we're gonna put in the code, I'd love to hear about it. So whatever that House bill number is, I'd love to read it. And while I got the microphone again, I think what we need to wrestle with is one of the paragraphs in these new bills says the following: a city may not impose setback requirements, yard coverage limits, tree retention mandates, restrictions on entry door locations, aesthetic requirements, or requirements for design review for accessory dwelling units that are more restrictive than those for principal units. So, how are we going to handle that? How are we going to handle setbacks? How are we going to handle coverage, lot coverage? How are we, if you read the surveys, it's leave them the way they are. Don't mess with the setbacks, don't mess with the lot coverages, don't mess with the tree, all that other stuff. What are we going to, we should probably talk about that topic. We haven't talked about it tonight, but that is a major one. It's one thing just to comply, But there's all this other issues that we haven't even talked about tonight, because it's 7:31.
But I think what that just said is you can't make those requirements more onerous
Oh, I
for an
know.
ADU, right?
Yeah.
So we would,
The question is, are we gonna make them, like, if somebody wants to put in middle housing or ADUs or whatever, and they're like, hey, can you please, squeeze the setbacks back and take away the parking requirements, and hey, can I take out some trees, and hey, can I make this look different, and hey, are we gonna allow that? Are we gonna say, nope, if you wanna put in middle housing, it's gotta, comply with all the rules we already have in place? Or are we gonna give them, special, whatever it is? Because that's the million-dollar question. Is that something that we are going to say yes to or no to? Are we gonna say as a planning commission, no? If somebody wants to put in middle housing and create better density, great, go for it. We're gonna apply with state law, but we're not gonna bend over backwards to get rid of setbacks or other things to accommodate it further. I'd like to have that discussion outright instead of just kind of not discussing it and then having it happen later without us thinking it through.
Yeah, I think that's part of that discussion and why I think it's gonna take us at least half a year to get through.
Yep.
Yeah.
Anything else on these 2 pages, Commissioner
Sorry, I got
Bennett?
one more. P8, the city shall encourage innovative housing development such as planned unit developments and cottage housing to increase the range of housing types. Now, this might need to be reworded with all the, and duplexes or something there. But for planned unit developments, I know we have some stuff in our code today. I don't believe anybody's really ever used it. And I know a couple of years ago, we were talking about creating like a point system. For those of you that were on the commission about, like, if you do this, it's worth 6 points, and if you get enough points, you can not build sidewalks or whatever. We've also talked about just getting rid of planned unit developments out of the code. Do we want to maybe think about doing that now?
I think we should encourage innovative housing development, especially because we have to plan for different income bands.
Oh, yes, true.
Whether or not we have to include
A planned unit
a
development
planned unit development,
as
I
well.
think a cottage housing development is a little different than
Yeah.
what Newcastle would have.
Yeah.
We just went through the planned unit development process with the Lee Bima property.
Mm.
It could use some tweaks. But I don't think it's a bad thing. I think we could talk about that as part of when we get through our ordinances.
But you think basically keep a planned unit development? Because at one point we were talking about just like axing the whole thing and not even allowing
Yeah.
them.
The one
Like
thing,
taking the whole section out, just delete the chapter.
yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there. I would say the one thing about a planned unit development is that it is more transparent than a development agreement process. So the more we could use planned unit developments than development agreement processes, I think that would probably also help council without having to look like,
True, I
There's
remember that
always-
discussion, yeah.
yeah, there's always like, oh, you're doing backroom deals, which we're not, but it
Yeah.
looks that way.
Yeah, okay, well, let's just keep it.
Actually, this particular one is the one triggered my question earlier. The statement says it shall encourage innovative housing development and had a couple examples. That's what I was wondering if, because like that one I said, I think I forgot what's it called, single unit or something apartment. Basically, it's like 180 square, very small room, and then you have common kitchen, all that. I don't know, that's some type of housing development I would like to encourage. So I guess I'm just like, this particular one, can we, some sort of, like, I don't know, the statement seems very loose.
I think this is the place to talk about policies and not get into the weeds about the size of the units or whatnot. So is the policy, we already have to allow co-living per state code. So and I would have brought that up tonight, but I honestly felt like it was going to affect the discussion a little bit less. But I think we're talking about housing choice here, and we're trying to bring more housing choices because we have to accommodate different income bands. So if it looked like Avalon, but it had co-living in it, would that, a lot of people probably wouldn't even know. Co-living.
Would it increase parking?
They'd still have to provide parking. So,
The same parking, like if more people, more butts or more seats. Sorry. So you said people probably wouldn't notice. The thing that on our street people notice is when there's more cars. In
Right.
our street, if there's more cars, we get emails, we get complaints. So there, people may not notice on the outside, but if there's more cars, that people would notice. So that, to Maggie's point, the loose language makes me nervous, and I'm okay with getting in the weeds and discussing it, kind of like that paragraph I read. I love this stuff now. It's fascinating to me, so I'm good with talking about those details and learning more about it.
I'm going to take a little different approach, but I think I end up in the same place as my colleagues here. I think if you look at P7, the city shall encourage housing developments that provide a mix of housing types and densities, including housing that is affordable to low and moderate income households. I think that absolutely needs to be here. I think that's what we're talking about. And I think that to the extent that we have co-living, planned unit developments, cottage housing, that's all in our code already. I think that falls squarely under P7. The thing that confuses me about P8 is I don't understand what that means. I don't understand what encouraging innovative housing development means. We're talking about things as examples here that are in our code. That's, I mean, I guess I don't think of that as innovative. So I find that whole policy to be challenging to understand why it's even something that we would have in there. So I personally would probably, I think we absolutely want P7. I think we all agree that's a good idea, and it's something we're required to do. Manufactured houses, we've already discussed that, aside, but I would strike P8 altogether just because I think it's unnecessary and confusing.
Any objection to the striking P8?
I got a question about it.
Wait, okay, go ahead and ask your question.
I don't know if this is an objection by question. Is that a thing? I'm just, my sense is that we're kind of providing the overall guidance, but I'm wondering if through the years to help pay for things, we're going to end up agreeing to stuff that this group would have said no based on our survey results, but because in the time we can get money for a roundabout, or at the time we can get money for a street, or at the time they're going to keep on chipping away at all this stuff that the residents said in the survey that they didn't want us to do. So that, all this innovation and agreement making with developers is going to result in smaller setbacks, trees getting cut down, parking requirements going away, aesthetics, character changes. That's what I'm wondering. Is that what innovation would turn into? I don't know.
Well, or the converse of that is a free park and a trail that have occurred in several of our developments as a result of that. They weren't required to do them, but as a part of the innovative, collaborative approach, they threw in some extra things.
The developers don't throw in extra things for free. What did they get? What did they get for giving us a park? I'm guessing it was something.
yeah.
Right? Because they probably wanted to lower the setbacks, right? They probably wanted to jam more.
Well, I would like to hear some examples because I provided one, but you haven't.
I'm sorry. They do, but they provide, so for development agreement, there has to be a public benefit provided in exchange for modifications, stipulated modifications to our code. So it says you can, Heemstra, you're going to develop all of this land. This is the park side of May Creek on the west side of campus, the city, off of 116th and 184th. So they provided an almost 2-acre active park, trails, significant tree retention, a large environmental, or a large overlook and retention of native growth areas, like 4 acres of that. And in return, they had, they requested smaller setbacks, smaller lots, so those are like a larger lot coverage for the buildings. And so that's the example on that one. Same thing for the May Creek assemblage. We got a roundabout that helped the traffic at what was that hairpin turn, and in return, they got smaller lots and smaller setbacks.
Well, so I guess that's the debate, is what was that a good public benefit trade for what occurred? I would submit it was, but you might not agree, but.
I disagree, and I feel that the complaint we get is there's too many cars. You know, the parking's atrocious. I'm worried about crime. There's people, you know, all these things that we're hearing in the survey. That's what I'm saying, why didn't we just tell them to put in the park? Why didn't we just tell them to do this stuff? And then when they said, well, we want smaller setbacks, we say, no, go to the next city. And they say, okay, fine, we'll make it work.
So-
You know, why do we have to agree to lower the setbacks and have them jam buildings, you know, up against the lot lines, instead of saying, we want a park and we want a roundabout, and you can only put, you know, 60 units instead of 100 units.
Yeah, and that has to do with Nexus. And so when you look at Nolan Dolan is one of the case law that you would look at, and the other one is escaping me. But you can't require a developer to do more than what is what's practical or reasonable.
We're not required to reduce the setbacks, are we?
We're not required to, but it's an option in our code.
No, that's what I'm wondering. I mean, I'm just, again,
I'll-
remembering the surveys that we read, people saying, I love Newcastle, you know, the way it is, and the character and the aesthetics and design, all kind of stuff. The developments that are going in seem to be more like the neighborhoods that the Quigg family looked at and said no to, and then came across Newcastle, and we just liked it. I'm not saying I'm doing what I think I want necessarily, as much as I'm saying, based on the survey, we might, when Scott was asking, what does innovative mean? I'm like, well, does innovative mean we're kind of just giving into the developers?
Right. But if I may really quick, also, those projects were on our capital facilities plan. So those were projects that were identified in our comp plan that the city wanted and were agreed to by the citizens as well, as projects they wanted, and so they were provided by the developers.
It was a common refrain in every Newcastle Trails meeting that I've been to, is how appreciative they were of what the developer did, going above and beyond. And you can't require a developer to do more than their impact, to offset their impact. And so this is a plus. The negative, of course, is you do get greater density. They still have to provide the parking, but you get a few more cars on the road. I would agree with that.
All right, we were talking about whether or not there was any objection to eliminating P8. And I don't see any objection. And
Huh? Well, I'm just, so this is under the heading of housing choice. I just want to make sure that we're not, when we think about housing choice together, so we're looking for a mix of housing, affordable, I'm looking at what's highlighted, right? Multifamily, single, duplex, middle, so we have this, maybe innovative is gone at this point, and maybe it is taken care of in our code. So I'm just trying to think, I just want to make sure we're not taking out an adjective that we need somewhere to be stated, just for staff, for one, because we use the comp plan when we're looking at our staff reports. So if it no longer says innovative housing development and we have something like Lee Bima come in, then,
But Aaron, can I respond to that?
yeah, no, please do.
But in that instance, that's a PUD, and we have planned unit developments in our code, right?
That's true.
And to the extent that there is, for lack of a more dignified term, horse trading around this free park for this give on your setbacks or what have you. I mean, again, that's already, those are housing types that we have contemplated. There's, to the extent that we are facilitating a broad variety, and I think between, you know, co-living and these things that we already have here that we're talking, and frankly, using as examples to describe innovative, I guess I'm just not sure that having that in there isn't either redundant or confusing to me. So, and I guess I'm what would be, you know, if somebody, I guess I'll put it another way, if somebody were to come and to say they wanted to do something totally off the wall, and I don't know what it would, you know, I can't even imagine what it would be, but something that's not already contemplated, maybe something like the micro apartments, but something even more, you know, unorthodox. Then if that doesn't fit into what we've done in the code, isn't that either pressure for us to evaluate if we need to look at doing something different in the code, or maybe it's a way to say that really ultimately just doesn't conform to the, you know, the options that we've elected as a community to have and make available for housing here.
Right.
I mean, it's,
I'm not against taking the policy out. I just
know.
want to make sure that we've kind of covered our bases.
I'm just trying to take it through to the end with you and try and think of what might be something that would be innovative that wouldn't be already contemplated by the code or be something we couldn't address some other way. I mean,
Right.
it's this is taking this out isn't a barrier to innovation.
Right.
So
Is this something that we should defer, and you can think about it, come back to us?
No, I think we can propose to take it out, and then SCJ may come back and say, well, did you think about this? And we'll see what they say. But they might be like, yeah, we already took it out. So,
Okay, now we're taking it out. All right. Let's move to the next 2 pages. H04 and H05. Okay, anybody have any questions or any changes? Vice Chair Kennard?
P30, it seems to me that because of our open meeting laws and records, that all of that is already incorporated into our program. So I guess we could leave it in, but it seems like it's already there.
Is it already there, Aaron?
So P30, any records we have would be subject to a records request. Publishing its records of who participated and what what participants contributed. I'm not 100% sure what this would achieve or what that would look like. Do you want to
Well,
talk
let
to
me
it?
tell you why I wrote it.
Yeah,
One of my favorite words is transparency.
okay.
I think we're making critical issues, and I love for the very, 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 very few people who say, Jim, I saw, I watched like 30 seconds of your YouTube video. You guys really care a lot about this stuff. I think it's good for people to see the debate that goes on and how he kind of corrals the horses and we're all talking through these issues. We put a lot of effort into these things, and we rely on data and surveys and penny polls and open houses and all this kind of stuff. So I think it's important, like, the gate that went up. Why is there a gate? Oh, who did that? Or, there's the safety issues, all that kind of stuff. Why do we have this many cops or that many cops or what? I just think to the extent we can create transparency, because, we did the survey and I appreciated that Aaron Qualls provided us with the raw data so I can dig in through and read, because the summary doesn't, that little word thing was helpful, but it was helpful to be able to look at the raw data. And so I'm just saying, you shouldn't be able to just click on it from anywhere. Like somebody in Russia shouldn't be able to look up people's addresses and names and research us. But I'm just saying we should keep records of why we made these decisions and who participated in all these events we did. Not necessarily that it's open to the whole world, but if anybody wants to know, we didn't just have people from New York come in and crash our parties and fill out fake surveys. These are real stakeholders in our community that affect the decisions we're making. That's what I was going with, and maybe it's unnecessary. I don't know. That's what was in my brain, Charlie, when I typed that.
So I just have a what if. We just had a public event where people showed up, would we require them to absolutely register? And then if they fill out a survey, because they're providing that information, do they have to put their names on the survey? So that, because that's all part of our decision-making process, and I'd be concerned actually about privacy issues.
So, I agree with both of you, and I think that that's the last thing I am. I promise you that. I think the word here that caught my eye and I think is causing me pause is publish.
Yeah.
And I think that as one, that's a very specific word, and two, it means, not just make available or promote transparency, but having something in a policy here that is a shall statement and publish, that could, I think there could be some unintended consequences with having this in here the way it's drafted. I think that the privacy piece is one. I think it could create an unfunded mandate for the city to have to make every last, to create a repository that's available to the public, and it wouldn't be limited. It could be anybody from anywhere that could access published materials. And I think you're right. Anything that we have that is a public record is subject to a public records request under the state sunshine laws and FOIA and what have you. But I think that the spirit of it is more what you described, and to have some sort of a statement in here, and maybe our consultants can help us craft it around transparency of process and communicating out making this this process available, I'm struggling for the word, accessible for, and then do make available summaries or to provide appropriate reporting or things like that, or to make efforts to do this. There are probably ways to do this. That's probably even too granular for a policy statement. But just to talk about transparency of the process is maybe a better solution.
I think I honor the intent of community participation, making sure people are all involved, making sure people know what's going on, doing our due diligence to make sure that people can find out what happened. I think that's all very honorable, and I think that's what we strive to do. And I don't think it's a bad thing to have as a reminder to ourselves. So I think I'll take kind of what we've talked about and make note of it and talk to SCJ about how to make sure that's incorporated.
You don't have to keep that red line in. It's fine. It's just the fact that we had this conversation makes me feel better.
I would suggest just adding a couple of words. The city shall promote community participation and transparency in all levels of decision-making related to housing and neighborhood.
That's perfect. I like that, yeah.
I have two quick questions, Aaron. More curiosity than anything. The first one is on P18, the different models for home ownership, and referencing things like, land trusts and other. Again, we've got the word innovative developments there. I'm not sure that I care quite as much there, but do we? I guess maybe I have two questions specifically about that one. One, do we see much at the city level of sort of unusual or alternative, innovative models, new models of home ownership? I guess I question whether there is a city policy. What are we trying to support with that policy statement as a municipality? Is it is the idea there that there are opportunities for home ownership that are going to be more available to people that are below that are below 50% AMI or that sort of thing? Is that where the policy comes from?
Yeah, this is without this is going to sound maybe too harsh, but to me it's almost paying lip service to the requirement to consider affordable housing options. Okay. Because we allow all of these, we allow owner-built housing and land trusts. People don't build them in Newcastle, and we don't actively go after trusts or not go after, but we don't actively engage with developers that might develop.
Encourage it.
Yeah, encourage.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I guess if the intent there is there something that is additive to the other policies under the reduced housing costs that should be reflected there with that policy 18? I guess I'm wondering if that's one that we should retain as well. And it's not that I'm not supportive of those types of programs. I guess I'm just wondering if maybe there's either a more straightforward way to say it, or else if it's picked up somewhere else. I don't love how it's worded if these are programs that people haven't taken advantage of for the last 10 years. It seems irrelevant.
Mm-hmm. Well, above we talk about encourage and support nonprofits, public-private partnerships, housing authorities to provide affordable housing and supportive services. I mean, I think the two kind of meld into one another a bit.
I mean, I think if the city were to create a permitting barrier for land trusts or something like that, I mean, that would be discriminatory anyway. I mean, I don't even think that would pass muster probably, I'm guessing. So, I mean, maybe it's that sort of a concern, but I don't know, it seems a little bit, I put a question mark by that one. The other question I have for you, and which I think is probably quicker, is P21. The city should adopt land use policies and regulations that treat government-assisted housing and other low-income housing the same as housing of a similar size and density. I don't have a problem with having that in here at all. I'm just curious, isn't that already the law? I mean, aren't we required to do that anyway?
I think so.
Okay.
I mentioned this to Charlie earlier, and we don't have to get into great detail, but ultimately, everything we got to do is got to go to a vote, right? So the survey, all our amazingly brilliant perspectives, staff, the consultants. We also have Councilmember Tallman, Mayor Clark emailing us. The survey results say don't make any more changes than you have to. So to what extent are we going to incorporate where this is ultimately, because we're just putting together a proposal, right? We're trying to incorporate the new laws with the code and this consultant advice and all this kind of stuff. To what extent are we considering the elected council members' input, or how are we going to, or how are we going to deal with that?
I would offer some advice on that. I think the council members' input is important because they are people who pay close attention to the city and know more about it. But I think we consider their input in the universe of input that we've received from all comers, and we put together our best recommendation based on all of that input. And when we make a recommendation, they're going to look at it really carefully, and they're going to have an opportunity to mold it to the way they think it should be, which is the way things should work. So, but I think so I don't know. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay, are there any other comments on the housing element? Because I think we're at the last page here. And we're also just after 8 o'clock. We need to make a decision whether to continue the meeting or defer the economic development to another date. So any other comments on housing? Okay. What is your pleasure about continuing or calling an end to the meeting? It's not going to end at this instant, but in the past, when we've gone past 2 hours, we've kind of had a vote to extend it.
Well, I guess someone would need to make a motion to extend it, and then we take a vote. Or someone would need to make a motion to end the meeting, and then we take a vote.
So the alternative would be to discuss economic development at our next meeting.
All right, and we have land use.
And land use is still out there, yeah.
So let's just say, anybody want to extend the meeting, make a motion.
I motion we extend the meeting to 9 o'clock.
Do I have a second?
I move we go to the Coleman.
Yeah, you want to make a motion that we move to the Coleman and invite the public to join us there?
Only if Jim is buying.
All joking aside, we would not go to the Coleman with more than at least 3 commissioners, and I don't know if that's ever, because that would violate the public meetings law, so no need to worry. Okay, so let's.
We have a motion on the table.
We have a motion on the table, but it has
There
not
was
been
no
seconded.
second, right? So it's dead.
Fails, yeah.
On the other hand, do we need a motion now to change the agenda and not talk about economic development tonight?
I don't think we need, I don't think so. I don't really know, to be honest with you. I'm not a parliamentarian.
let me just say, that would be the intent. We will just move this to our next meeting. And I don't think, I mean, there's no disagreement about that, at least not among the majority.
I just question on timing though. I know we owe SCJ our comments. So on land use, economic development. Do we have time to wait a month?
Our schedule calls for us to have all our comments to them by the end of April. So if we were if we met in April until we were done with our work, we would meet that deadline. So
Okay.
if someone made a motion to extend the meeting for another hour, then then we would probably want to extend the meeting. So get a good night's sleep before the April meeting. Okay, so let's go back. Yeah.
So do we anticipate there being, I mean, a lot of this evening, I think, was really good conversation on the legislative session housing recap. Do we anticipate there being other substantive discussion at that next meeting? Or will this be I mean, I want Paul to be like top of the order if we're gonna do that. And if not, then maybe that changes my thought.
We do have our joint meeting planned for May 21st with council. And then our next regular meeting for May would be the day after. So if we need to talk about what we're going to talk about, that would be the only substantive thing. And then also whether or not we're going to have a May 22nd meeting after having a May 21st meeting. Or I can buy you all pizza on a Saturday again.
Let's, okay, well, the next thing on our program is additional public comment, then we have the planning calendar. So why don't we, let's see if there's additional public comment, and then let's talk about this when we're talking about our planning calendar. So I will open our additional public comment period now for anyone who would like to make a comment.
Here we go.
Good evening, Commissioners.
And speaking is?
Thank you, Steve Tallman with Olympus. Just really quick, I think the community appreciates the conversations getting into the weeds because we talk about details, we talk about definition, we talk about terminology which make a difference. When I, for example, like when I see shalls and shoulds and I think of contracts and proclamations and laws, I see mandates and I see options. So, you know, what we shall do is a mandate and what we should do is basically an option. So I'm starting to look at those options a lot when I read through the plan, just a comment. But in terms of terminology, you know, when you guys are talking about the city shall, you know, on the first page where the city shall protect the quality and character of existing single-family neighborhoods and as described. I think the terminology is good as is because as we go through changes, we still need to make those changes consistent with our character as it is today. And we still have to make changes with different housing types and such, but we can still do that with the same character application. So that statement, you know, as you're talking about changing them, it feels like it actually provides us a safe ground to move forward and to grow, but with the existing character, which I think is really important for us to continue to pay attention to. I specifically like the conversation about how we compromise with the developers and, you know, reducing setbacks and coverage for other concessions that result in more cars on the road. I don't think is a good option for our community. And that definitely eliminates this whole idea about maintaining characters of our neighborhoods. So, you know, as a council member, when I look at these things and if I see developers that we're trying to work with them, I would think mostly about the character of our community and the wishes of the people and the safety of our people, and fewer cars on the streets is a safer environment, which we all know. So these are my comments, and I appreciate everything you guys are doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we will close the public comment period and now turn to the planning calendar and resume the conversation about our next meeting. So we have two elements to discuss. We will not have a presentation up front like we did today with the update on the legislation, so we'll have more time. But I think we'll have to be more disciplined about our time, and we may have to go longer. If it turns out that we do not get through that conversation, it may be necessary to schedule another meeting. That doesn't, and so between April 23rd, so that, we're talking about our April 23rd meeting. We have a joint meeting with the council on May 21st. I don't think we're going to have a draft plan by the 21st. I don't think we're going to get that till July from our consultants. That doesn't mean that there aren't things that we will have to discuss with the council. And because I think we're going to be, at that point, we're going to know what are the things that are the most visible issues that will be part of the conversation. And that would be a good opportunity for all of the council members to express their views about those. So I think it would be good, Aaron, before we have that meeting, to have a conversation with the mayor about how we can most productively use that time. You know, perhaps you and I and the mayor could meet about that. But there is time between the April 23rd meeting and the joint meeting to have another meeting if we need to wrap up any details.
It's a Tuesday. I think it's the 24th.
Is it 24th? Is the meeting on the 23rd or 24th? 24th. Meeting on the 24th should be a 3-hour meeting. Can we just plan a 3-hour meeting with like a 10-minute intermission halfway through? Just in that if we don't need to go 3, it's better than.
You could
That's-
start, you could also start sooner if, I don't know, obviously what your work schedules allow for, but you could start sooner.
I can't start sooner, but I can go until midnight. But it'd be nice if we just said we're going to finish at 9, then we finish at like 8:40 instead of thinking we're going to finish at 8 and then have to go extra.
Right now, I'm not sure if there are any other topics that we have to talk about it. I don't know of any. Aaron, anything in the back of your mind that you think we might need to address at the April meeting other than these two elements?
No, just the two elements, and just making sure we feel confident about the May meeting.
We're not scheduled to talk about small cells until later. I mean, we can, the planning calendar that I think was part of our agenda item that has that for June. If we met the day after the joint meeting, if we wanted to meet with the joint meeting, there may not be a reason to, but there are things we can move up but it'll be, the commission's choice about whether or not to move up the conversation. For example, the design conversation. I think when we started talking about the design conversation, we were talking mostly about downtown and big buildings like the Watermark or but maybe now with the thought about introducing duplexes into formerly single-family neighborhoods, there's that design conversation is a wider conversation. So those are the things that were lined up to do. But I think once we complete our element recommendations and pass them on to SCJ, we don't have any comp plan work to do until they bring back a draft plan. And at that point, we will have to go through that with a fine-tooth comb, see what whether they, how they incorporated our direction, what they left out, and whether they left out anything that we thought was significant. So that there's probably going to be a lot of study time that we'll have to do before we meet, and then probably a good amount of conversation time during meetings. So, but that's July, August timeframe. Okay, questions?
Is it reasonable to stake out, so the April 24th is that Wednesday. I'm not sure how much time, I think a meeting can be set in a matter of notice of a couple of days, right? So, I mean, does it make sense for us to, as a group, look at if we could get a quorum for the following Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, if the city calendar permits, and just we place a hold on that, so if on the 24th, we determine, hey, there's stuff in the introduction to talk about, or there are other things to talk about that we feel we haven't completed, and it's just not reasonable to do it on the 24th. Better safe than sorry. I mean, I could do the 29th, the 30th, the 1st, that's the first half of the next week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I could do any of those nights. I don't know how other people's calendars look, but I would be willing to hold one of those if we thought it was prudent.
So are you just suggesting that we now kind of, just among ourselves, hold a date that we'll keep reserved, but won't decide whether to use it until after the meeting on the 24th?
I guess, I think so, yeah.
Yeah, okay. What do you think about that, commissioners? Yeah, okay. Do you want to use that same method you used before? You had sent out a calendar with the available dates? Okay.
I don't even know if it works on the city schedule.
Well, everyone will know the city schedule.
Yeah, at the end of that, I think the May meeting is going to be at a town hall, so we'll just not schedule it the same night as the town hall.
Well, there's almost 2 weeks between our April 24th meeting and the town hall. So we could have a meeting in between those two.
But we owe comments at the end of April, is that right?
Mhm. Yeah,
End of April.
Yeah.
So that's what I was thinking.
but we'll have already given them most of the elements. They'll be waiting for two, and hopefully they'll just be waiting for one after the 24th. Or none, yeah.
I don't expect it to be complicated, but I'm just trying to.
Yeah, no, that's a good suggestion.
Are we giving them stuff to work on, or are we gonna give them all at once? Are we giving it to them in chunks so they can come in and work on it while they're waiting, or are they just waiting for us to give it to them and then they're gonna get all at once and they're gonna have to, can we feed them slowly stuff to work on?
We definitely can go ahead and start feeding them documents. We can even, we
Yeah.
can go ahead.
Yeah, that was my understanding, is that not, the elements that we've completed, you can turn over to them.
Sorry if I'm forgetting. I sent them, they have the notes from last month that I sent to all of you from our meeting. It was this month, on the 9th. Were you expecting me to do further changes to the documents?
Well,
Or the commissioner's gonna?
the documents, yes, I guess. So as we went through those documents and we agreed on things and didn't agree on things, were you keeping track of those?
I was keeping notes on the side. I wasn't writing in line
Okay.
on each document. So that's where my question comes from, is I will follow up with SCJ if they need more than the notes I provided them.
Well, I think they definitely need more. I think they need our markups, yeah.
Right.
So the question is then, who has the best record of those markups?
It was what I put minus the thing about transparency, plus getting rid of the manufactured homes, plus getting rid of the innovative thing.
Right.
Well,
I have
I have
today.
notes about tonight, but what,
I don't care.
Generically, I mean, wouldn't it be what we all had prepared and what we discussed, and then the notes to accompany what we talked about?
I have
The person has their own best copy, I think.
Right, well, I guess what I'm saying is, like, Brian's, right? You're my guy tonight, for examples. You know, Brian's.
Speaker, please.
Thanks, sorry. Brian's got his markup, and where we had things that we had concerns or issues about, we discussed and there would be notes taken. But there would still be things that Brian had noted that we all were like, oh, yeah, genius, right? Yeah, so they're gonna need to see what Brian did and then take the notes as kind of supplemental to interpret that, I would think. Otherwise, you're gonna lose everything that Brian did that we agree with, right? And that's gonna be times 7 of us. So they're gonna need all of that.
Yeah, so I think we have a bit of a problem.
We have a bit of a problem or a challenge. We need to create a document or resuscitate a document that has what we started with plus what we agreed on. Because just like tonight, we didn't agree on some things and we agreed on some things. And so there was a new recommendation following that.
But don't we have notes for the new recommendation? I mean, isn't that what? Right, so if those go with the original markup, I mean, they should be able to look at the original markup and say, okay, no corresponding note, the markup's good. Oh, wait, on, you know, TRP2, we've got to make sure that we look at the note as well and we do what we need to do there.
Do you think your notes were that thorough?
I think they were pretty good. I have to look at them again. I will have another staff member back. I will have Tyler back on the 12th or 15th. Once he's back, I can try to get them to a state. I can't work on them for a couple weeks.
My recommendation is that each of us take these notes, if you were presented, go over your markup and make sure that these are accurate or correctly recorded, and then include that markup and get it to Aaron.
Everybody remark it out.
I just did mine. I can send you.
Would that help you?
Thank you. I appreciate everyone doing that. I'm happy to ask them if they need us to mark them up or if our notes are sufficient.
Oh, I said I think they will want to mark up. That's fine. I can just incorporate the notes to my markup and send it to you and Aaron, or send it to, okay.
Took pretty careful notes on the changes. I don't know if I didn't think I was going to be the note taker, so I wasn't being totally religious about it, but I cut everything from tonight.
Yeah, and I,
Send you.
okay. And when we made decisions on things, those were noted, so.
Sorry. I think Vice Chair Kennard's suggestion is a really good one. Compare the notes to what your markup is. Make sure your markup reflects everything in the notes. Turn that markup over to Aaron. And Aaron, I would like to then go over that with you after you collect all of that. Actually, why don't you copy me on that as well? Because if I don't have my notes with me, but I'd like to see what you have against what I have. And if I see discrepancies, then I'll come back to you and say, what do you remember? Okay? All right. So our next meeting is April 23rd, and with that, we can adjourn.
Thank you, Chair. Aaron, great job tonight.
Good job.
Takes up all the time.
I can tell PUDs are going the way of the dinosaur.
They are? Yeah, sounds like it. Manufactured home PUD, done.
Yes.
I tried.
Where was